Welcome to Architecture Series, Architects Talk with Kalebodur or Conversations with Architects. Today we have a very distinguished guest, Sergei Tchoban. Thank you for being with us. Welcome to Turkey, welcome to Istanbul.
Thank you very, very much.
And welcome to GAD Foundation. I would also especially thank the foundation for providing us this extraordinary space for the conversation. You are originally coming from Russia, yes. Moscow, namely.
Petersburg.
Petersburg, sorry. But you are working in Germany for a long time.
Yes.
So you are an European architect on one hand, but you know the geographical differences and you worked many places all around the world. But recently you have received an award which is significantly important, and some of the critics say that that is the highest award in Europe, and it is the European prize, isn't it so? Can we start from there? I mean, what kind of an accumulation brought you this prize, in your opinion?
I don't know, maybe better to ask the organizers.
They say that best modernist buildings that are internationally iconic, complex, enigmatic, provocative, and profoundly artistic. They have listed many things, actually.
Well, what I think is already important for me, and that's why maybe I can say I'm very glad to receive especially this prize, because I love European architecture. I love European tradition in the architecture. What means not only a special part of Europe, but also many, many parts of all over the world were under influence of European architecture as architecture of spaces. Mm-hmm. I was born in Petersburg, I was grown up in Petersburg, and I've seen just in the old part of the town.
You have studied in Petersburg?
I've studied there. I was grown up in the very old part of this town. This town is not historical town. Mm-hmm. It's more like a repetition, like a next layer of European town. What was made in very short time in 18th century. So far, this town is like a combination of very, very many traditions, and very many different samples are coming together in one town. So far, from very young age, of course, I was very pleased to see the spaces, the stages, the details, the structures, the surfaces of real European town. And what I think is real value for architecture. So far, what I try to do in my modest works is to understand, first of all, the relationship between iconic and usual, between one space and other, how the space should be created by different buildings, and what is the relationship around of spaces. So very, I would say, very European questions belonging to the tradition of European architecture so far. I'm really glad that this prize, I'm very honored, unbelievably honored to get, dedicating to European thinking in the architecture.
Actually, they use an adjective like provocative. Do you think that your work is provocative?
I don't think it at all. I mean, I'm very usual in what I make, but maybe.
But your drawings, some of your drawings,
are
drawings,
very provocative. Maybe what I'm really thinking is that what I try to do in the architecture, in the surface of architecture, to come back with very contemporary forms, with very, let's say, rational forms, but to put inside very complicated, even ornamental structures, textures, and on this way to come back to traditions of many more as 100 years. I think it is maybe for today even a little bit provocative, because nowadays we of course are all very, very deep in this on one level staying modernismus. And this modernismus has a lot of very interesting points, but it has some very difficult point, that the buildings becomes not real old. They are very interesting to be new, but after a certain time you see that the building is somehow not more noticed. Also the building is out of your field, and maybe in 30 years it will be demolished. So the life of the buildings of modernity is unfortunately became to be very short.
That's true.
And
yes.
and then I became to think about what kind of buildings have a possibility to live longer, and what kind of buildings, and there are many, unfortunately became the possibility only to live very short. What wasn't in the past centuries, because everyone, even small building, has built on this way to live really long and to be older on very interesting way.
And land prices were not that high. I mean,
yeah, the
comparing with
price to make this building was that time not that high. But nowadays, because of very poor surface of the building, because of very poor volume of the of many buildings, so they became to be like a very poor surrounding of some really interesting iconic parts. And my idea is how to bring also to this background part of the building some ideas or some details, making them as a interesting, also in the time, interesting surrounding for the towns, because we don't have every time the big chance to build in historical towns where we have already the surrounding. But many towns are being now as a contemporary from beginning. And
true,
in these contemporary towns, we ask ourselves how long they will exist. If we take samples of contemporary towns of 20th century, we will notice without any problem that these towns are very short life towns. So even now, after 50, 60 years, you come in these towns and you are really not appreciated about the surrounding, about the spaces, about the atmosphere coming in, even by a lot of green, a lot of spaces. You notice that the surfaces of buildings became to be old, not on the right way.
For the sustainability of the building, I think there are three major determinants. One of them is the material quality and the detailing.
Yes.
The second one is, of course, the meaning, the symbolic or iconic, whatever you call, meaning that will provide the building to be sustainable throughout the cultural changes, social, economical, political changes. And of course, the third one is the urban scale, as you have mentioned, the environmental development and redevelopments. In this sense, what I see is, especially in your firm profile, you are referring that you are starting every design with a sense of environmental consciousness, a kind of a contextual sensitivity, let me say, not only in terms of physical, but also cultural, economical, etc. So there are two actually cases in Europe. One of them is, of course, the historical context, or the new, let's say, developments. So how do you see these different contextual characteristics in your practice?
Well, you have spoken already about 3 points, what should be in the building to give them a chance to be older and to be a good part of sustainable structure of the city. But I think there is also a fourth one, that's the flexibility.
That's
That's very important because
flexibility.
functional, even unfunctional flexibility. I mean, we can see the factories was built over 100 years ago,
Yes.
and these factories were built for many other reasons as we use it now. but the flexibility of the structure and sustainability.
But factory is by nature is a very flexible building.
Yeah, but any building, let's say by nature, also Pele is by nature very flexible because it has roof, it has walls, and it has space. And
like the one we are inside now.
Yeah, we are inside over the garage.
Once upon a time, it was a car parking space.
The most important point of flexibility, first of all, to recognize that if you demolish the building, you put through, first of all, a lot of energy. Was created to build this building out, and we can speak about a lot of sustainability of greening, of any cases of saving of energy. But in the same time, if we demolish any building after 20-30 years, we waste a lot of energy we use for that. And that's why I think the flexibility of the soul of the building, the flexibility of the structure of the building, to put in many other functions, even the functions we cannot expect now come. And for that point, to create a structure of the building and to create a surface of the building what can be older and can be loved also in the time, because we demolish the building, we are not loved. Not only we architects, because architects is a very small part of all people, but many people are not architects. They love or don't love the buildings, and if they don't love, they leave it demolished. And that's why I think to understand how to create the space or how create one singular building, you have to. I think you have to understand. You have to imagine how your building will be lived with different functions, with different times, and how it will be older. Then hopefully you create something what can be used also in many years. Otherwise you create like exhibition piece and no else.
Is it why maybe most of your projects, let me say, have a kind of a modernist background in terms of the structural system, tectonics, and the grid?
Because we cannot forget our past. We have already more than 100 years of modernism, and modernism has a lot of things are very, very good. And to forget them and to say, okay, it was a very, very short but wrong way, because 100 years in the history of architecture is very, very short way. Let's forget it, it's wrong. Let's go in the past and begin to make columns and spaces like 19th century. No, we have to recognize what was important for anybody to look at the architecture, to love the architecture, to draw, to photograph. Because I was coming to my modest understanding what is architecture through drawing. I was studied on the school for drawing and for painting, and after that I began to paint architecture.
It was an art school.
There was just art school, middle school, where you learn all cases, also art, but not only art, also mathematics and physics and so on. And after that you ask yourself what is interesting for you. And I've drawn a lot, but especially I've drawn also people, but especially I've drawn architecture. And it was important for me every time why you draw this building, why you draw this stage, why you draw this street, why your pencil or your pen going this line and try to make these small elements, the small details, why it is interesting for you. And I recognized through the hand that some small details of every building is maybe most interesting as a form, as more interesting as a structure of the building. Even just very small elements, what making building older, what making building beloved, and that's what I think. What we should understand as architects, what for our building should be loved by normal people.
When I was making my homework, studying your buildings, there were two issues that came front. One of them is you don't have any stylistic engagement. I mean,
not real like a stamp.
Yeah,
no.
Yeah, not like a stamp. Yes. So you are open to develop lots of different buildings. So it's not easy to trace style-wise, maybe. And the second issue is you are working in a very wide range, scale-wise. I mean, from urban design to single building design, campus design, maybe decoration or object design, even some artistic production, etc. So I mean, how does this come out? I mean, in terms of I mean, comparing with the other offices in Germany.
Well, of course, there is architecture.
Is it unique?
I don't know how unique it is, but okay, I was coming from drawing. I was coming from this, let's say, artistic work. I don't like to step it too high, but it's somehow for me important to create these fantasies, to create the drawings, to understand what is important for me in the architecture. That's first of all, because in the drawings I can think about what I search, what I have to look for in the architecture. Then I begin to create buildings. There are different questions are coming out by them, and that is the most important point. And of course, the life of architects is more as only architecture. You create exhibitions, you create maybe
That's
even
true,
theater, stage design, or you make your own exhibitions, or you create the exhibitions of other artists like designer. But all them, I think, is very secondary in comparing to architecture itself. And because what I think is very important in architecture is that we create the spaces what are living besides of us longer time. And that's idea that you create something what forms also the people behind you, and you are responsible for it, and it's very difficult. You don't create only exhibition space what is coming and going away in 3 months or so, half a year. You create something what is living, or maybe will be demolished, or will be beloved or not beloved, besides of you. You are going away, and you cannot make any other decisions more. It leaves independent from you. And on this way, I think if you compare my works, you can see some very similar things are going not maybe in the form, or not maybe in the type of the building, but they're going in the depths of details, in the form how I work with details, how I work with many small things from what the building will be constructed.
Okay. So when we mentioned these drawings and the exhibitions, I had a chance to look at the video of the LA exhibition.
Yeah, right.
And you had an already explanation about it. And what I recognized is your drawings, as you have underlined, very fantastic in terms of, I mean, it is different forms and maybe freed from all these structural concerns, etc., etc. When I come to your buildings, that's totally different. How do you explain this gap? I mean,
I would say it is real different, because if you see, for example, such a buildings like an H hotel in Berlin, or my museum, or some high-risings I made, you see very big contrast of these buildings to the surroundings they are built in. And
contextuality is significantly important.
Or discussion with contextuality. So what I am very busy with my drawings to understand how the different types of the buildings are connecting each other. And by creating a real building, I ask myself every time which role should take this building in the stage of the town. And of course, seldom you have a building, it makes the role of main actor in this stage. But many times you have the building what has not the main role, but has secondary role. And you have to recognize that, and not to make this building like a first one, like a first role. You have to be modest to give them the idea, and to give them the details, making them interesting for the people. If somebody comes near to this building, he or she can see the smallest details of this building, but the form of it is really quite modest, because it's not the main role in the stage of the town.
I think this is a very significant and valuable idea, especially when you consider the competitive market and everybody wants to be in the first place.
Yeah, but
So
you cannot give to every building first place.
That is an idea that harms the urban quality and continuity, sustainability and contextuality of the building. For the drawings, you have also established a foundation,
Yes.
isn't it so? So it is organizing some exhibitions, collecting some
Yes.
drawings, and is it in Moscow or is it in
No,
Germany?
it is in Berlin.
It's
It
in
is
Berlin.
established in Berlin and has museum space in Berlin. And the foundation was founded by me because I think that drawing is very, very important way of thinking. Very important way how the creator, the architect can transport his ideas and show these ideas to the people and to himself also, to understand what you like and maybe to create on this way new ideas. On the other side is a drawing is a very significant part of art, and I think the piece of architectural drawing is still now very, very contemporary and very interesting part of exhibition art. And so far exhibited art. So far I think to exhibit architectural drawings is important in two ways. First of all, you exhibit in this way the thinking of architects, how the architects are creating their projects and how the architects are thinking about their projects. And on the other side, you exhibit really very fine, very interesting and very contemporary pieces of art. And on both sides, we are creating very different exhibitions, very polar to each other, from very historical to very contemporary. We'll have a next year a very important exhibition of Alvaro Siza, and after that of Tom Main, James Wines, as very, very different positions, very strong positions in the drawing as a part of thinking of architect. On the other side, we have an exhibition about expressionists in the film industry of Germany. So we speak about drawing as a part of thinking of filmmaker, makers of film designers, and then about Pölzig, about architects of beginning of 20th century expressionists, or about very historical way of architects of 19th century. We work very often with Johnson Museum from London, with Albertine. We had enormous exhibition from Vienna about all times from 15th century to 21st century of architectural drawings in the collection of Albertine. So we have very, very different exhibitions, and I believe, I hope.
And you have an archive for this?
We have archive, and we use this archive to exchange with another foundations and with other museums to give them the possibility also to exhibit our archive. But we don't use our archive very often for the exhibitions I'm explaining in our rooms.
Okay.
So we bring another institutions to the position to exhibit something what they cannot exhibit maybe in their own spaces, because the spaces are maybe too big, or there are many works. So
maybe we can organize an exhibition in Turkey.
Yeah, absolutely.
It will be very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I would be very pleased. I've even some.
Let's work on it.
Some drawings of Mimar Kemaleddin in the collection of the archive. Some drawings of. I have the collection, but I would be very interested. I even had an idea to organize an exhibition of Turkish architectural drawings in our museum, because of course
that will be very interesting.
Yeah, because it is very, very, very huge part of culture, and of course also Berlin is a very international stage for architects. Would be very interested.
Years
for this.
ago, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I made an exhibition titled Thinking with Lines. What I did was to collect the sketches of Turkish architects.
Yes.
And then some of them are associated with the buildings and some of them are not. So I mean, it was a kind of a, not only a kind of a drawing exhibition, but also it was a kind of a exhibition to understand the critical process, how drawing is a way of critical design process or something like that.
Exactly, similar exhibition.
I should give you one of
very
one
good.
of the books.
Very good. It would be very good because
published.
exactly similar exhibition we have now in our rooms. From Drawing Matter from Neil Hobhouse, a great collector from Somerset, nearby from London. And it goes about drawing hand, as drawing positions. It goes about sketchbooks of different architects from many countries and on very different levels. As a sketchbooks, as a singular pages from the sketchbooks, singular drawings, like a way of thinking. But it goes not about pieces of ready drawings. It goes about, as you say, lines and way of thinking and way of creating.
Yeah, you can read many things. What is the influence of your Russian background on your architecture? I mean, you have stayed a certain time in Russia, then you moved to Germany. So, I mean, you know both mediums.
Yeah, of course.
And Russia is a very unique and interesting architectural medium.
That's right.
Especially when you consider the modernist era. I mean, there were lots of significant and unique contributions. On the other hand, I mean, it is a deep cultural background, but you didn't decide to stay there. You moved to somewhere else. So, how did this bicultural existence influence your architecture?
Well, I've moved beginning of 90s, where the economical situation in Russia was not the best, and of course I wanted to
I'm asking this because this is the case for many Turkish architects and young architects that will be interesting to listen.
Well, I've done it in the time where really the situation was not good for architecture and for development of architecture, because I was quite young at that time. It was end of 20s, 28, and well, I wanted to develop myself longer, and in that time it was not a good time for architecture. It was good time maybe for many other things in Russia, and I love it's my country. I was born, and but in that time I wanted to learn and learn longer, and for that point, of course, going to Germany was quite a good case, because I could learn a lot. Also learn many technical things, because Germany is quite famous for as a country where you can learn very good working drawings and significance of realizations of your buildings, of ideas, any ideas, bad or good, but you learn how you bring your idea to realization. What is very important for architect, not only to draw, not only to create, but to understand how you bring your idea to realization. And of course, it was a good school. It's still a very good school. But to come back to Russia, I work in Russia since 2003 back, because also together with Germany, other countries, because I won that time together with Schwieger in competition for Federation Tower in Moscow City, and it was a chance for me to come back and open the office in Moscow.
It was a very competitive context, isn't it so? There are lots of towers.
That time not. That time not, because it was 2000. It was 2000.
The others constructed later on.
They are constructed later, but still it was the idea of a big point.
Island of
island of contrast in the very modest surrounding. So if you continue my idea about some iconic element in the surrounding, so all Moscow City, not only our building but many other iconic point in the comparison to the surrounding, what is much more modest.
You designed the two towers?
I designed the Federation Tower. The two towers are beginning to be built 2005, and they were really complex, but there are much more around. And even me, I designed now second complex, not far away, inside of this Moscow City. But anyway, it was a single idea. That's why I was coming to Russia back. But of course, what was very interesting for me by coming back, to learn or maybe to recognize more about the culture. Because in my school time I learned a lot about old Russian architecture, and of course 20s like constructivism and avant-garde is very, very important input in the of Russian architecture in the history of all over the world.
It's internationally
very recognized. But I think this architecture couldn't come without the architecture of old Russia, of 12th, 13th century, of north part of country, like Novgorod, like Pskov. And if you compare very clear these both architectures, the architecture of old towns, old churches of 12th, 13th century, and after that you go to constructivists, you see a lot of similarities, a lot of parallelities you can recognize between both. So far for me, by my work in Russia, it's also very important to not only to bring my experience, what I got in Germany and other countries, but first of all, to learn what kind of traditions, what kind of own language of Russian architecture could be developed by new projects. Could be then sustainable language for this country, because I don't really believe in big internationality of architecture. Of course, there are many international trends we go and follow, but on the other side, every big culture has to be national, has to create their own roots and has to continue their own roots, because otherwise we get just an architecture where you cannot recognize anymore in which country you are, because everywhere you have the same. And for me also, or maybe especially in Russia, was very important with the modest knowledge I won in my former experience to bring this knowledge to recognize what kind of historical structures, what kind of tradition could be moved in the contemporary way and used in the new structures to recognize them as a part of Russian architecture. What you cannot mix with another trends in the world.
But especially in the last 2 decades, maybe there was an immense transformation ongoing in Russia.
Yes.
In terms of urbanism, architectural style, everything in culture, in lifestyle. And you are in the advisory board of Moscow, are you?
Yes.
Yeah. And how do you see this transformation in Russia? In terms of urban scale and architectural scale.
I think the most important thing is that we came more narrow to the quality of details. So we don't create any more huge complexes where detailless or without any love for surfaces, for structures, for quality of the building. We create more what has really interesting, nice, also sustainable elements, details, and the realizations became much better quality as it was, for example, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. So we create a lot of public spaces are coming much more narrow to the scale of everybody of us. So we don't create spaces are unhuman. We create also more human spaces in Moscow, public spaces, parks, what are really loved by the people for the free time they spend in these spaces. And I think it's very, very important, the quality of human scale, and recognizing of the quality of human scale in the buildings and in the spaces. That's, I think, the most important trend we can recognize now.
Are you quite familiar with contemporary Turkish architecture?
I love Istanbul. I'm not really familiar. I mean, someday I opened for me the name of Sinan. It is not very contemporary, but for me enormous contemporary, because if you ask every Western architect, he answers the father of all contemporary architecture is of course Palladio, and even any contemporary architect will say Palladio is on the beginning of all proportions and structures and so on, one of them. But to understand that in the same time as Palladio, Mimar Sinan was living in Istanbul and beginning to work even with 50 plus He was not architect before 50.
Yeah,
and it was for me amazing. I remember the way of Peter Zumthor, who began also to build, to work as an architect quite late, and created enormous work. And by Sinan, to see his buildings, by seeing similar structures, to see every time this variety of details, this variety of compositions. I think it's great to understand that this here, in the very different culture, was possible to create very, very important figure, minimal equal to Palladio, maybe more, I don't know, but very, very important figure for development of all architecture, and especially of architecture of your country. And I think to go to Russia, I began after that to recognize that in the same time in Russia, if you see their cathedral, the Basilius Cathedral in Moscow, you see what Corbusier mean like a colorful cake, but it was completely other as Palladio or even Sinan made in the same time.
That's
so,
true,
and if you see these three elements made in absolutely same time, then you see how important it is that architecture will not be like international and make the same trends anywhere, but how important it is to create the culture of national traditions, because on this way, even if you have enormous connections here through internet, through all exchange of knowledge, exchange of information, so you see how it is important to create these different ways in the same time. And not to believe that only one way is the most important and other ways should be forgotten. But and that was what I recognized in your culture enormous.
What about Istanbul? What about Istanbul?
Istanbul is a very nice town, very nice. As if I've been here maybe 10 times together, and every time I am coming back, I love this town because spaces, difference of spaces, difference of layers. It's a town what is not monolithic, but it has on many different places very, very interesting.
Have you been anywhere else other than Istanbul?
I've been in one time in resort. Of Turkey, but I love all of things because I've been here many times. Istanbul. I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't know other towns, but for Istanbul, I can say every time I come here, I feel at home. It's very good.
That's very nice. This is a classical question, but which building or buildings do you think that represents your work, your architectural understanding best? In other words, I mean, when we add some of the images.
Well,
which
I have
images would you like
on the one side, there are such buildings like an H hotel or museum, what are samples for like iconic part of my work, where I can show like these or similar, I can imagine can be iconic building in the surrounding of some backstage area. And on the other side is a line of quite modest, but I think good detailed buildings, city houses. In Berlin, I've made in last 5 years, like in the Jäger Street or Alte Schönhauser Street, or many of them, some of them, 5 or 6, where every one of this I can show like a sample how I think could be done a very normal, very modest building that would live hopefully more years as only 20 or 30. That's the idea I have behind these buildings. They have no unusual form, no unusual structure, no unusual even input inside, but they have, I think, nice details and nice elements, giving them the chance to live longer. And that are two parts, or maybe Granatne 6 in Moscow. There are two parts of my architecture what I think is important.
Mr. Tchoban, thank you very much for being with us. Would you like to add anything that we have to underline, or I forgot.
Oh, thank
to
you.
ask you.
No, thank you. I've followed you with big pleasure.
Okay.
Very interesting questions, and thank you very much for your discussion.
Yeah. Hope to meet in this exhibition, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I would be very pleased. Really.
Either in Turkey or in Germany.
Yeah. As a boss, maybe both.
in Moscow.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, maybe also. But I think to bring Turkish architecture on this way of drawings to Germany more, this idea I have already many years, and I would be pleased if it come back.
Very nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.